so unusual to have a female founder that this must be something great because it's a woman.
First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
The company was valued at a total of $9 billion.
We might think of those personality types like Steve Jobs as...
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Now she's facing the prospect of decades in prison for fraud.
I don't think you would intuitively grasp damage to so many people.
People who had had cancer and then they got the bad results.
Theranos investors were nothing but rich amateurs,
like Rupert Murdoch or the former U.S. Secretary of State.
Leadership conference with Bill Clinton.
It sounds like men were falling to her feet.
You think? Mostly older white men.
If you understand that early that you're at risk, there's a lot more that you can do about it.
She even changed her tone of voice to sound more intimidating.
She knew she was doing wrong.
Hello, my friends. Today we'll be focusing on world-famous Silicon Valley. Big ideas, great ambitions, lots of money. Elizabeth Holmes had all that and then some. She came up with a revolutionary blood testing method, which could produce near instantaneous results. Her project received massive investment from several well-known politicians and businessmen. Holmes thus became the youngest female billionaire in history, but then turned out to be the most notorious fraudster in America. You've probably heard this story on the news or watched The Dropout with Emmy Award-winning actress Amanda Seyfried playing Elizabeth. But today you will hear the story of this incredible scam from those who were directly involved, including Elizabeth Holmes' right-hand man, who would expose billions of dollars worth of fraud. This is his first extended interview on the subject. I'll now give the floor to Ilya Yegorov.
As a 19-year-old, how do you go about the process of convincing people that you know what you're doing and that you can pull it off? Science and math and engineering.
She was very magnetic, very...
I don't know if I've
We've
ever
talked to
done
her,
that.
and there's just this sincerity that radiates from her.
Super young and very imposing. And I have been quoted mentioning that she didn't blink, so it rattled me. I felt nervous.
I think the first piece is realizing that it's not necessarily about age. And people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and the Google guys and Michael Dell and Larry Ellison and others have demonstrated that.
At just 19 years of age, Elizabeth Holmes founded a medical startup that in 10 years would be worth billions of dollars, with a promise of an incredible scientific breakthrough.
At the time, she was presenting herself to the world as this great entrepreneur, right, who was going to revolutionize medicine. And, we might think of those personality types like Steve Jobs as perhaps being mercurial and difficult, but ultimately being product or business focused.
I sleep about 4 hours. Yeah. I feel like the luckiest person in the world every day because of what I get to do.
She employed countless gimmicks that made her seem like a real entrepreneur. She dressed like Steve Jobs. She used short, sharp, well-thought-out phrases. It has been proven many times that she even changed her tone of voice, making it lower to sound more intimidating.
Our belief is that every person, no matter where they live or how much money they have, has the basic human right to access to their own health information.
What was so unusual about her was that she had this extraordinary resource behind her and was not really running it as business. She was really running it as a personal enterprise.
I think that there are charismatic people who attract based on their personalities, and others who build such an attractive persona, and also media and maybe a whole entourage is also furthering that persona. So Elizabeth Holmes, I believe, was one such case.
Miss Holmes, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Federal officials have reportedly launched a criminal investigation into blood testing company Theranos.
We're going to take a closer look at the case against Elizabeth Holmes.
Elizabeth Holmes was riding high, the world's youngest self-made woman billionaire. Now she's facing the prospect of decades in prison for fraud. Our business correspondent.
If you describe the story in the abstract, I don't think you wouldn't necessarily think would be affected as deeply as they were.
She was secretive. She cultivated a certain mystique. The dynamics of power is that you maintain mystique, unpredictability, don't know when the enemy is going to strike. And she really understood power very, very well as showmanship and how to be an actress.
I know many, former Theranos employees, and a lot of the stories are somewhat like Adam's in the sense that really people really devastated.
This Steve Jobs in a skirt, though in fact Miss Holmes preferred to wear pants, was known all over the world. Her medical startup Theranos was touted as the next big thing after Apple, Google, and Facebook. Holmes claimed that her company was capable of providing instantaneous blood test results. Within 10 years, Theranos amassed $700 million in investment. Its board of directors included 2 former US Secretaries of State. By 2014, the company was valued at $9 billion. And even in faraway Russia, where the name Holmes had only been associated with a famous detective, many people were stunned when the incredible success story of a female entrepreneur turned out to be nothing more than a fraud. Last year, Elizabeth Holmes was sentenced to 11 years in prison. In this video, the truth about her path from visionary to fraudster is told by the people who knew her best, including the person who exposed her in court.
I'm John Ioannidis. I'm a professor of medicine and of epidemiology and population health at Stanford University.
Professor Ioannidis was the first to question the scientific viability of Elizabeth Holmes' startup.
I'm Phyllis Gardner. I'm a professor of medicine here at Stanford University.
Holmes turned to Phyllis Gardner for advice back when she was studying at Stanford, and Gardner tried to talk some sense into her ambitious student. Her invention simply wouldn't work.
I have a PhD in chemical engineering from Stanford University, which is where Elizabeth went.
Ann Kopp-Sill was offered a job at Theranos by Holmes in person. But at the very first meeting, Dr. Kopp-Sill saw that the startup was nothing but smoke and mirrors.
My name is Joseph Hughes. I'm an inventor, principally in the pharmaceutical business. I live in Middle Tennessee. I'm a named inventor on about 50 U.S. patents, principally relating to oral drug delivery.
Joseph Fewers, a friend of the Holmes family, and his father, Richard Fewers, a holder of many medical patents, provided vital information to the journalists who exposed Holmes's fraud.
I'm Cheryl Gaffner, and I worked at Theranos, Inc. for a little under a year.
Gaffner joined the startup as a simple secretary, but soon she was transferred to an HR position in charge of staff's leisure activities.
My name is Adam Rosendorf. I'm a father of a beautiful 5-year-old girl, first and foremost. I'm a physician. I graduated from Mount Sinai Medical School in 2000. I've been working in clinical pathology since 2005, so for 17 years.
Dr. Adam Rosendorf was a key employee at Theranos, and some years later, he became the key prosecution witness against the founder of the company. This is the first big public interview.
Oh, hi, how are you? Yes, I'm available for interviews with the press and with media outlets regarding the strangest tale that was ever told, an important story for the future of responsible business and healthcare in the United States.
My parents, my father and stepmother, Richard and Lorraine, were neighbors with the Holmes family for a couple of years in Washington, D.C. And my stepmother and Elizabeth's mother, Noelle, were very close friends.
Elizabeth's father had been a senior executive with Enron, One doesn't know exactly what the circumstances of his dismissal or quitting of Enron were. Nothing good happened in the executive branch, in the upper levels of Enron. It was all sick and tainted, just like Theranos was.
Her parents were, shall we say, backward-looking. They had been part of this. Her ancestors had been part of the American business aristocracy. They had come from extraordinary wealth that had been dissipated over the years. They were not happy about that. These were people that, in some respects, felt that they were better than other people, but in other respects felt like victims, like something had been, taken away from them that they had a right to. And I think this is the extraordinary. I don't think you can understand the extraordinary scope of Elizabeth's personal ambition without understanding this dynamic in her family.
They'd saved their whole life for my brother and I to be able to go to college, and they let me take that money that otherwise would have been used for their retirement to put into starting this company.
In 2003, Holmes dropped out of Stanford, just like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and Mark Zuckerberg had dropped out from their universities.
I teach a course on venture capital at Stanford School of Business, and a third of my students want to become venture investors, while the rest want to create their own startup. Sometimes they come to my office at Stanford, but I've never had a student who would come to my office who would be telling me about their startup idea without the indissoluble confidence that they are going to change the world.
I think that for being a leader in a company, I wouldn't hold it against her, the fact that she dropped out from Stanford. I think that Stanford is a great place. It's very exciting, but some people may be so smart and uneasy to settle that they want to try their own hands and their own luck.
When I researched all the unicorn founders, there are approximately 2,500 of them in the US. I saw that a very small percentage, only about 50 people, are dropouts. They had been enrolled at some big universities, such as Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, but instead of graduating, they founded their startups. In fact, there are very few of them, so I don't recommend dropping out to my students.
Theranos is a combination of the word therapy and diagnosis, all sorts of tests on that single drop of blood.
I was walking by their headquarters because their headquarters are where I live. They're in my neighborhood. So I came across that very interesting name that had a Greek feeling in it. I know Greek. It reminded me of Tyrannos, which is tyrant, or Thanatos, which is death.
Of course, her ultimate commercialization was not a therapeutic. I mean, it was a diagnostic, but not a therapeutic. But she kept the name.
As a freshman, Holmes won the right to do laboratory work with the graduate students, and then to become an intern at the Genome Institute of Singapore. In Singapore, Holmes studied blood sample analysis to find traces of the coronavirus SARS-1, but not the one you're thinking of. That pandemic broke out in 2002 in Southeastern Asia. As she herself told The New Yorker in 2014, this complex process of taking blood samples made her consider its technological optimization.
Over the course of the last 11 years, we've made it possible to run any laboratory test for anywhere from 50 to 90% comprehensive laboratory tests from a tiny sample or a few drops of blood that could be taken from a finger that traditionally have to be drawn from an arm and replaced it with the nanotainer.
So somebody that was an advisor to her company, I also knew. So that person just suggested that I be a consultant at Theranos because I did have expertise in moving fluids around and making a product for a diagnostic application, that used one drop of blood. I definitely thought they needed at least 6 months to figure out how they were going to get the blood into the device and make the product. So perhaps Elizabeth just didn't want to hear that kind of information. So I never consulted for them in the end.
I was pleasantly surprised to see that they were trying to disrupt healthcare, that they were planning to use massively technology that could test 100 times more blood tests in 100 times less volume, 100 times faster, 100 times less cost. In principle, that seemed very exciting. I said, well, perhaps I can run all the blood tests that we run in our studies in my team, and that would be an amazing way to collaborate. So I started trying to see what they do in terms of science, and I realized that they had no science to back this up. They had not published any peer-reviewed papers that would describe in a way that other scientists would understand what exactly they're doing.
She talked to 100 people. Many of them would be like, no, this doesn't sound right. But if there's a few people that are like, oh, isn't this interesting, this is wonderful, I love your idea, she'd just keep talking to them, just keep. Then those people, maybe she talks to some more, or they tell other people. Some are dismissive, but some are like, oh, this is great. I think she had a nose for, just finding people that really listened to her and said how great she was and how great everything was. So I think it then kind of builds on itself. And, not Phyllis Gardner that you all talked to was a professor at Stanford that was quite suspicious and not believing.
Elizabeth Holmes had found a reputable, even legendary man in the world of science who believed in her.
But there was another professor at Stanford that was very promoting of Elizabeth. And I do think that got some of the investors. Oh yeah, that professor I'm talking about is Channing Robertson.
This is an unbelievable thing that he did.
Would you have given money to her? If I had the money, sure. Why not? She's smart. She studied at Stanford. Her idea was supported by a leading Stanford biologist who had taught her personally. She sounds convincing. And there is something charming about her obsession and youth. There's something that makes you like her.
I've always seen money as a tool, right, for being able to make a difference. I never would have built the company this way if it was about making money. It's about creating value, and money becomes a byproduct of being successful and creating value.
When you look at his career, Channing Robertson himself has never really been successful commercially with any of his ideas. He's mostly, in his personal capacity, he's mostly known for being an expert witness in litigation, which is a good job for somebody who is well-spoken and eloquent, because at the end of the day, that's the job description of an expert witness, is to sound intelligent for a jury. But I think the thing that Channing really had going for him, was the meteoric rise of Stanford and Silicon Valley, and the notion, which is a blessing and a curse, the notion in Silicon Valley that anything is possible.
We're a private company, and we have a very small investor base because we like being a private company, and we think there's a lot of advantages in it. We think that we can do things.
It's not what you know, it's who you know. This saying, allegedly by John Rockefeller, perfectly illustrates Elizabeth Holmes's business practice. In 2011, she met former US Secretary of State George Shultz. Soon after that, he became a member of Theranos' board of directors. Through his connections, two former heads of the Pentagon, a famous banker, and even legendary diplomat Henry Kissinger was brought along. With that kind of support, Theranos attracted investments from the richest family in America, the Waltons, owners of Walmart, who invested $115 million, media mogul Rupert Murdoch with about $120 million, and former Minister of Education and daughter of billionaire Betsy DeVos with about $100 million.
It's interesting that all capitalist women specializing in biotechnology that I've talked to more than 1,000 venture investors, including biotechnologists. I usually ask them if they had considered Theranos. They say yes, we did. But in the end, we didn't invest in it. If we look at all the investors in Theranos at the later stage, actually at every stage, 2 years after they had raised their angel money, they were all non-professionals. They could be famous, like Rupert Murdoch or a former US Secretary of State, etc. But they are famous for completely different things, in a different field. Those investors knew absolutely nothing about startups.
Simply put, Theranos investors were nothing but rich amateurs.
You're absolutely right. But of course, when we say amateurs, that doesn't mean they are amateurs in everything. Of course, we can't call a former US Secretary of State or Rupert Murdoch amateurs. That would be incorrect. But when it comes to investing in startups, it's a whole different ballgame. Even if you're an expert in finance, a traditional finance market professional, you can still be an amateur when it comes to investing in startups.
Look, yes, they knew nothing about the underlying technology. I think it was probably a myth or an idea appealing to them. I think we see this a lot in the U.S. at the highest levels of success. People get to a point where they have so much money, their interest isn't so much in getting more; it's being involved in things that they think are prestigious or neat. So for Jeff Bezos, it's building a rocket ship to compete with Elon Musk. But I think for these men, the idea that they would go to a cocktail party and say that they're helping this, young blonde-haired woman to transform medicine, I think this was their rocket ship to Mars. This was a story that they could share that sounded exciting, made them sound kind of liberal or progressive in the right way.
I've got to first say what a privilege it is for me to be here with all of you and sitting up here with George.
I suppose there was some connection between them, but I don't think they saw her as a daughter or a granddaughter. I think it was all very politically correct. They supported a young, talented student who had come up with an idea to change the healthcare system in the US.
I actually think that she used her gender and her sexuality to attract money for that very reason. That it was so unusual to have a female founder that this must be something great because it's a woman. So she exploited that perception. I don't know if it's... my sense is that sexism is still fairly pervasive in Silicon Valley. So,
it was extraordinary to me, when I saw her both with David Boyce, who was her attorney, and at that time, was the most celebrated trial lawyer in the U.S., and also with George Shultz, former Secretary of State, former Secretary of Treasury in his 90s. She was remarkably comfortable with both of those men in a way that, to me, I can only characterize it as bizarre in the sense that she would very comfortably invade their personal space, be very close to them in a way that we wouldn't typically see in America. In fact, you just wouldn't see in American business culture, particularly from a young woman.
It sounds like men were falling to her feet.
Oh, you think? Mostly older white men. I hate to say that, but I say it all the time. Their brains seem to have gone soft.
Was it a trivial story of a woman enchanting men?
Нет, конечно.
Of course not. There's nothing trivial about this story. I think that it was men who invested in the company because they had money, because they were excited by the idea and they believed she truly wanted to make a big change. I don't think there is some cliched story behind it all, but the fact that she managed to fool this many smart men for so long definitely makes her special.
But neither Holmes's connections nor her charm could have transformed Theranos from a startup into a company worth $9 billion without the idea of a quick and cheap finger prick blood test that hit the sore spot in the American healthcare system.
People don't even know that they have a basic human right to be able to get access to information about themselves and their own bodies that can change their lives. Every person should have the ability to get that type of test, because if you understand that early that you're at risk, there's a lot more that you can do about it.
By claiming that this was an innovative company that was going to also provide very cheap testing because their prices were way lower, and they were way lower, but they were basically burning through millions of dollars each month.
Let's give this story some context. What was going on with American healthcare at the time? Why was it important?
American healthcare hasn't changed much since then. First of all, it's extremely expensive. It's more expensive than in Europe, for example. Secondly, many people either don't have medical insurance or don't have proper coverage. This means healthcare for them is very costly, and it's a huge problem for American society.
The hospitals charge enormous amounts and make hundreds of millions of dollars in profit, except they're, quote, non-profit. They're supposed to treat the poor, but they try not to. It's one of my pet peeves, big time pet peeve, after Elizabeth Holmes.
We pay practically 20% of the GDP in this country, and our health is not necessarily the best in the world. It's probably at the bottom of high-income countries.
Yeah, well, they jumped on that bandwagon. It was a bandwagon they jumped onto because they were lobbying politicians. Elizabeth had personal relationships with the Clintons, with Chelsea and with Hillary and with Bill. She appeared in a leadership conference with Bill Clinton, who claimed that she was the future of healthcare.
One more fact, and then I want to call on Jack. You founded this company 12 years ago, right? Yeah. Tell them how old you were.
I was 19. Yeah.
So, don't worry about the future. We're in good hands. It's okay.
Hundreds of venture biotech investors were considering investing in Theranos. If at least one of them had bought into their technology and seen some results, Theranos would have seen a surge in investment from professionals, because the market is admittedly huge. Even if we put global markets aside and consider the American healthcare market alone, there must be tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars there.
In 2015, Theranos signed a contract with the largest American drugstore chain, Walgreens. This was the breakthrough that could transform a startup into a giant corporation, just like Tesla or Apple.
So there's 8,200 Walgreens nationally. Mm-hmm. That would put us within 5 miles of every American's home, and that's what we're working to do.
Her contract with Walgreens proved to be the peak of her schemes. Without checking lab results or FDA approval, people were giving her money and signing contracts.
The same year, being the youngest American billionaire, Holmes appeared on Time magazine's Top 100 list. Joe Biden, the vice president at the time, visited Theranos' lab at Palo Alto and called Holmes inspiring. There was only one problem. Theranos' main brainchild, that wonderful device, a mini lab that could process tests on the spot, was actually a dummy. Out of 200 reported tests, it only did 15, all of which were inaccurate. This device, named Edison, after the famous American inventor who used to say, "I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways it won't work."
So we codenamed our product, what started as that patch, the Edison, because our premise was we will fail over 1,000 times until we get this thing to work, but we will get it on the 1,001st time. And I think that mindset has really guided so much of what we've done, because there's a determination to make it work no matter what.
I kept asking, like, oh, what's your invention? You know, how are you going to do this? What's the key thing? And I can't remember what she said, but it was all very vague, you know, just, oh, we integrate the parts and this. I would not have been able to draw a picture at the end of lunch of what they were doing. So for me, it left an impression that they might not have anything, or there was just no way to know. She, of course, claims she needed to be secretive. But I was like, look, you know, if you want me to help, you got to tell me what you're doing or what it is.
It ran a set of well, we had two versions of it, I think, at that point. There was the 3.5 device, which ran a set of immunochemistries, and then there was a 4-series platform that we were working on that could run a broad range of test methods.
Does look like a printer. I think she didn't have the chemistry right. She clearly, that machine wasn't working. Do I think someday somebody might be able to do something? I don't know. But sure wasn't working. And she was getting, you go in, you get a finger stick, in a few minutes you'll get your result. That's not true.
We have been, for example, proactively submitting every single one of our tests to FDA because we believe that it's so important in terms of a quality stamp. I mean, I think about it as my mom goes to get a test in one of these locations. I want to know every single time that data is flawless, no matter what.
The FDA approved only the herpes test, which was presented by Theranos as a grand victory, but in fact was only a Pyrrhic one.
They had them all in a basement downstairs. They looked like Apple Macintoshes, except they were black. Most of them, they were all running fake protocols that my friend Michael Craig wrote, fake software. Summer of 2013, Sonny said that there were going to be banks of Edisons running 24/7 and banks of mini labs, and they would be churning out data. And he also called the Siemens instruments clunkers or dinosaurs because he was convinced that their technology was so much better. But actually, I came to learn later that the demonstrations were faked to investors and to the board. And the Edisons themselves were very prone to breakdown, had very narrow heat tolerances. Pipettes would break. You had to take 6 measurements and average them to get anything near an accurate measurement. All kind of dripped into my consciousness bit by bit.
When investors were getting a little nervous and the projects weren't coming in the same time frames, she would just remind them that this has never been done before, and that real genius takes time. But we're so close. I would hate for you to not get in on the bottom floor with this, because this is going to take off. And you will be wealthy individuals, but just hang in there. We're almost there.
I drank the Kool-Aid like so many others had done, including Kissinger and Schultz and members of the board and multiple investors. They raised almost $1 billion from really quite naive investors who hadn't done their due diligence, and also pulled the wool over the eyes of the patients. And later on, the Arizona State Assembly, because they lobbied to have lab testing be available to patients without a doctor's order.
Giving people the right to obtain a laboratory test will, by definition, begin the process of enabling them to engage in their health.
Future whistleblower Adam Rosendorf was hired in 2012, not long before Theranos' triumph.
I was looking to exit my academic job in Pittsburgh. I was working in the basement of the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. Had a very supportive boss, but the adult hospital and the Children's Hospital didn't really care that much about me. I was a very junior person, and my career wasn't really progressing as rapidly as I wanted it to. And so I looked on the web, and at the same this was about end of 2012. I was reading a biography of Steve Jobs, written by Walter Isaacson, which is actually in my bookshelf behind you. Almost 1,000-page biography. And it described how Jobs revolutionized technology, world technology, by inventing products and perfecting products that made people's lives easier. Actually, in Elizabeth's trial, the defense lawyer waved a copy of the Isaacson book and really tried to have me admit that Theranos was an innovative, honest company, which was obviously nonsense. So, yeah. But that's so basically, I reached out to the company, to the recruiter. They rapidly got back to me. Within a couple of weeks, they invited me out to California. It was the deep depths of winter in Pittsburgh. Snow was up to my knees. I couldn't hardly dig my car out of my driveway. And then I arrived in California. I was overweight, pasty, in a woolen suit. And I arrived there, and there were rolling hills and a beautiful glass and cement building, but no labels. It was just a small sign that said Theranos and with their logo. And there were 2 security guards in the front, and they made me sign a non-disclosure agreement right away, which was weird because I knew nothing about the company. I wasn't there to steal their secrets. And I'd reviewed some patents that Elizabeth and her colleagues had filed, and they were interesting to me. They were about remote data transmission, microsampling, fluidics, optics, chemistries, and they seemed really interesting to me because I was really interested in microfluidics, actually. There were a lot of people in Boston working on that. Button-up shirt, and then Elizabeth came in. She just appeared out of nowhere, like a ghost. And she's wearing black from head to toe, black polo neck, like her outfit. Steve Jobs wannabe. And all she wanted to know from me was if I could keep a secret and be loyal, which was also weird. I've never been in an interview. So there are all these red flags from the get-go.
Everyone was being keystroked, and simply meaning that IT was instructed by Miss Holmes to make sure that we were not discussing any inner workings of the business. Even though I was talking to people that had previously worked there just to see how the heck they were doing after they left, it was still considered a form of insider information. My boss saying, oh, by the way, we knew that you had a chit chat with so-and-so who used to work here, and we don't recommend that.
So we all had this kind of naivety about how business is supposed to work. So we thought secrecy was normal. We thought not lying, but we thought it was okay not to tell people the full picture. It came from the top, really, and we were all very scared to speak out because we would have been fired pretty quickly. So Elizabeth had a long history of, and Sonny too, of immediately firing people who disagreed with him.
Theranos' chief scientist, Ian Gibbons, joined the startup in 2005, and in May 2013, he committed suicide. He had cancer, but it's also worth mentioning that the day before the tragedy, he had to testify about Theranos' patents. The company sued the family doctor of Richard Fewitts, father of our interviewee Joseph Fewitts. Theranos accused Fewitts of stealing patented technology. The case was settled out of court. According to Ian Gibbons' widow, he was nervous and didn't want to participate in the trial. After his suicide, Elizabeth Holmes immediately demanded that his widow return his work laptop.
First of all, I talked to Rochelle and she told me Ian, who killed himself, because he was supposed to testify at the deposition saying that Elizabeth had written all those patents, but she hadn't. And he did not want to lie, because if he lied, if he said the truth, she would fire him. And she'd fired him already once, but everybody objected in his group, so they were going to quit. So she brought him back, but put him at a desk job.
Theranos' ex-employees said that the toxic attitude as well as psychological pressure had been there from the very beginning. When considering the company, do investors usually point out this kind of thing? Can it be a red flag?
It is a huge red flag, Alexei, not because the investors are all nice and kind. If we take a look at the statistics, we can see that startups usually go bust and fail not because they lack money, but because the members of the early team start arguing and can't get along, and venture investors know that. They spend a lot of time on that, especially when they see 2 founders or a founder and a team that were there from the start. They usually spend a lot of time analyzing the relationships inside that team. Some venture investors even hire therapists to meet the founders or the original team, because they know that without human capital, the startup is bound to fail.
Right before the launch, which was around October of 2013, I went into Elizabeth's office. This tech is not ready for being launched. She was not her normal self. She was nervous. Her knee was tapping. It was weird to me that she basically crumbled in front of me because she knew that I had the power to shut down the whole program.
Adam Rosendorf, I understand you interviewed him. Adam told me that when they got their CLIA certification, so that's the clinical lab investigative stuff, it's the thing that allows you to run tests. And he said when they did the CLIA certification, she locked the door to the Edison, her thing, and they only did them on Siemens equipment. Now, she didn't tell anybody that. And they diluted the samples. You can't dilute samples and get accurate results. I mean, some things you can get reasonably accurate, but a lot of it, well, obviously she was told not to do blood work. I mean, coagulation work, you know, blood coagulation or clotting, because that's a very sensitive test. And if you're off even a little, you can cause somebody to bleed to death or clot. And it's very dangerous. Same with potassium. If you're too low, you could have an arrhythmia. If you're too high, you can stop the heart. These are dangerous things.
People who had had cancer and then they got the bad results and they thought they had cancer and it scared them to death, or they didn't get the right results and the cancer. I don't know what she was thinking.
I wrote a paper for the Journal of the American Medical Association where I described that fact that they didn't have any support, any scientific publications, any peer-reviewed publications to support their claims, plus their reasoning of just testing more people more massively, more frequently. From what we know in preventive health about screening didn't really make sense. So I thought that I should alert the scientific community and the broader community that this startup that had an extremely high valuation at that time, they had the highest valuation than any startup at $9 billion, based on what they were available to present. Maybe their valuation might be $9 instead of $9 billion. Some people felt, those who were knowledgeable, I believe, in issues of screening, that I had some points that should be taken seriously. Many people distanced themselves because they felt that I was attacking the heart of Silicon Valley, the top innovation that was the landmark of this whole area. You know, I think that Silicon Valley stands for innovation, for disruptive innovation, and I think most people were very happy to see that there was such a bright idea that would change everything, rather than a methodologist professor who was just putting the numbers down and putting the evidence or the lack of evidence and saying, I don't see why are we making all that noise.
And then as time wore on, it became clear that the tests weren't reproducing. So you do consecutive tests on the sample, you get different results, which would freak me out. Pregnancy tests not working. Guys, you got to stop their brakes. And then they would get back, that's good, we fixed it, and I would believe them, I would trust them. If you don't trust people in life, you're screwed, because you can't go through life not trusting, right? But they were portraying that trust. Excuse me? Sorry, yeah.
No, but that's impressive. You could easily prove you're pregnant or not. That's the easy part here.
It's the levels, it's the actual number.
Yeah.
So they had tests where their actual HCG values would differ by 10-fold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold between successive tests. They told pregnant women they weren't. They told women who were pregnant they weren't. They told women that were miscarrying that had perfectly normal pregnancies. And then what started happening is that patients didn't really trust their Theranos results. They knew it was experimental in some ways, and went and got venous blood draws and sent them to Quest, or got tested by Quest and LabCorp, and the results didn't match. And then I was asked by Elizabeth and her brother Christian to essentially lie to patients or invent things that might explain discrepancies in the testing, and it became increasingly uncomfortable, and I felt like I was betraying my Hippocratic oath, and I over and over told them this wasn't right. And eventually, and I had friction with the management on a daily basis, and it's all in all of the emails that came up as exhibits in both trials. It's very clear that. So the other aspect is I didn't have any other job lined up. California was really expensive, and my parents would have been appalled if I quit my job. I didn't want to go back to New York and live with my parents. In retrospect, I could have gotten a job at McDonald's or Starbucks and rented a room somewhere and been fine. But there was a lot of social pressures, particularly in the Jewish faith from South Africa, to be successful. And that's not an excuse at all, but I did act in good faith at all times. And then when things became unbearable, I quit.
By 2015, when Holmes signed the historical contract with Walgreens, the complaints against her company had reached a critical level. Their partners and investors finally started asking questions. Authorities had several reports on the questionable effectiveness of Theranos' methods. But the final blow was struck by major US business magazine, The Wall Street Journal.
The Wall Street Journal was moving pretty fast, and in the next few months they started announcing their investigation that showed that really they had not only no evidence, but they didn't even have a machine, and they didn't have any of the testing that supposedly they were doing.
Tyler Schultz, grandson of George Schultz, the former US Secretary of State, who was on the company's board of directors, was a lab assistant at Theranos. Tyler was one of the first people to speak out about the problems in the laboratory, first to his own grandfather and then to the New York State regulators.
It was clear that there was an open secret within Theranos that this technology simply didn't exist.
Erica Chang was also a lab worker at Theranos. Just like Tyler, she blew the whistle on them, and the authorities came to Theranos for an inspection. Later, at Theranos' case hearing, Chang said that the results of blood tests done using Edison were as accurate as a flip of a coin. At the trial, Erica spoke about how people associated with Theranos had been following her for several months. But the main whistleblower in the Theranos' case was Adam Rosendorf, the head of the lab. His key role in the destruction of Theranos would come in light just before the trial. The former lab head had already started helping the investigation and couldn't reveal his name. He says that the world knows about Erica Chang and Tyler Schultz thanks to him. After all, it was Rosendorf who told their stories to John Carreyrou, a writer for the Wall Street Journal, who broke the story and wrote a book about Theranos.
My last day was around Thanksgiving of 2014, and at that point, Sunny and HR Mona Ramamurthy, who now has a very big job at Google, started to threaten me because they had seen that I'd forwarded myself a couple of hundred emails to protect myself in the event of that shit would go down, you know, which it did, because I knew that this wasn't going to end well, particularly towards the end. And then started the phone calls, the emails, the texts, the harassment, the voicemails. Boyce Schiller got involved. David Boyce has represented Harvey Weinstein, which is disgusting. Known sex offender, big tobacco he's represented, kills people. And actually Boyce was Elizabeth's personal lawyer as well as the company lawyer, as well as being on the board of directors. And then he said, "Do you mind staying on?" And I said, "No, it's not worth my reputation to stay on." And he said, "Oh, it's not worth my reputation to keep you." And then he ushered me into another room and had the HR lady, Mona, come to force me to sign affidavits and statements that I wouldn't leak any information to anyone, because it was all cover-up. And Sunny said, "Look at this guy, he's a pizza maker. He just came in from the street." The whole effort would have not even wouldn't have launched if it hadn't been for my work. And I wanted to shut it down, and they knew that. I quit, and then I blew the whistle to the Wall Street Journal. So, you know, around the time when I left, Elizabeth wanted to bring Ebola testing into the lab, and I was the last one to know about it. It's a biohazardous BSL-4 or 5 pathogen. I sent her an email and said, "I've heard that you want to bring Ebola into the lab. Why didn't you tell me? We're only a BSL-2, which is like a hood and a mask, you know, and a gown." "Oh, there's many departments at Theranos, and you don't really need to know what we're doing," she says to me.
And I quoted in the first paragraph because he could not publish that article unless he had attributed quotes. And nobody would give him quotes with attribution. They were afraid of being sued by David Boyce, who was viciously going after everybody. So I said to John, "You can't sue me if I tell the truth." He said, "Right, you can't sue for the truth." So I said, "Well, what do you want me to say?" He said, "Well, what was her knowledge in engineering and medicine?" And my quote was, she had a rudimentary knowledge of engineering. She was 19. And no knowledge of medicine, clearly.
The day the article was published, Elizabeth Holmes made a statement on the business channel CNBC, but she failed to justify herself. With every question, her genius disappeared into thin air.
Which is why I think it's important that we speak to Elizabeth Holmes, the founder and CEO of Theranos, who's coming to us this afternoon from Boston, where she's attending a meeting of the Board of Fellows at Harvard Medical School, to give her a chance to answer the charges raised in the article. Ms. Holmes, welcome back to Mad Money.
It's great to be here. Thank you. This is what happens when you work to change things. And first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. And I have to say, I personally was shocked to see that the journal would publish something like this when we had sent them over 1,000 pages of documentation demonstrating that the statements in their piece were false.
Even Elizabeth's tone of voice was changing. As usual, she was trying to speak in a low voice, but at the end of the 10-minute interview, she lost her nerve.
When we launched our services in 2013, we put on our website that we do venous testing, so blood draws from the arm the traditional way. And starting in 2015, we announced, and it was published in San Francisco paper, in Fortune. I talked about it in an interview I did with Forbes.
After the company started to be investigated, they hired a law firm called McDermott, Will & Emery, who essentially helped Theranos destroy a laboratory information systems database, or has been accused of doing that, which would have proven beyond a doubt that the results were inaccurate. Most of the data in there I generated or curated, including lots of reference range studies, accuracy studies, all in the name of trying to get the testing to work.
Elizabeth Holmes's business was falling apart like a house of cards. Walgreens stopped collaborating with Theranos. A state regulator warned the public that the tests were dangerous. Several investigations were launched into Holmes and her business partner, Sunny Balwani. In 2018, Theranos was permanently closed. In 2021, after some delays, Elizabeth Holmes was to present herself to a jury.
So she was a confident, well-dressed woman with poise, deep voice. And at the trial, my thoughts were her hair was ragged and disheveled. She sat bolt upright the entire time, and she shot me some really dirty looks, daggers, as if to say, how dare you? How dare you say these things that are lies?
Then in court, she just seemed like a demure little woman, you know, holding her mother's hand, which seemed very odd. And just, I definitely think that was calculated by her and her attorneys to leave the impression with the jury that she was not responsible for all these things, that she was either taken advantage of by the other men.
Holmes claimed that she didn't make any decisions herself and that she was a victim of psychological abuse from her male business partners.
It is offensive to people like me that are women that do real technology and real things, that she gives that impression that she's in charge when she wants, but then when she needs to defend herself, she's like, oh, men made me do it. And
they're holding hands. This is one of those classic textbook tips the lawyers give on how to behave, how to dress, what facial expression to put on.
One is that, which is one of the abiding mysteries of the story, is where she got the resource to put on this defense, this $30 million legal defense. I'm not making the $30 million up. I mean, that was described in her in her papers in connection with sentencing.
I had various bizarre things like lawyers turn up on my doorstep from wanting a civil deposition, stuff like that. So it was awful. My doorbell malfunctioned. One morning I thought that somebody was coming to get me. I think it was impossible not to have some degree of paranoia because Theranos claimed to have very close ties with the US military. And there were drones. The US military has kind of unlimited surveillance powers and power, military power, and power to detain and to kill. And it was all fake. Elizabeth did have a relationship with Mad Dog Mattis, who testified in her trial, and with Gary Roughhead, a naval commander.
He was a decorated war veteran and then was serving on the board. At one point, he asked her a very particular question. I'm sure somebody gave it to him, and it said, like, which national authority, a regulatory authority, has approved the Theranos product? And Elizabeth wrote back a 17-paragraph email. Many paragraphs were just a sentence. But in my opinion, I'm not a regulatory expert, but for what I know, there was nothing in that was a lie. But everything was just so close to, misleading. Just the way she used words, you'd think, oh, they've got that approval. Oh, great. Oh, they have this. She would talk about how she'd met with the head of the FDA. So you'd think, oh, okay, she's doing the regulatory thing. Everything was just left you with the impression that they had done all the right things with regulatory, but they hadn't.
On November 18, 2022, the U.S. Court for the Northern District of California sentenced Elizabeth to 135 months in prison, more than 11 years. In addition, she has to return $121 million to her investors.
The federal sentencing guideline, the sentencing guidelines we have in the U.S., they will necessarily imply a sentence of that nature when such large amounts of money are involved. So I in that sense, I was not surprised. In other words, I knew that if she were guilty, that she would be facing a sentence of that magnitude.
The 11 years plus something was at the very, very bottom. It was the lowest that he could give that was in the sentencing guidelines. So it was on the low side based on those calculations.
Tried to flee to Mexico, got pregnant twice. One-way ticket to Mexico, to a wedding. Who gets a one-way ticket to a wedding?
What do you think their pregnancies were like? Wow.
Oh, very strategic, because the first one was she became pregnant shortly before the trial started, a few months, I think. And the next pregnancy was shortly before sentencing. And I don't think her pregnancies really factored into Judge Davila's sentencing decisions, but one never knows.
As far as I know, she was divide and conquer. Kids and marriage was certainly not part of that agenda. I don't know why she thinks that people don't go to prison with pregnancies. Ask all the pregnant women in prison.
Were there people that were supportive of Elizabeth? Yeah, definitely. There's people that think basically that she tried to do a big idea and have a big company, and then it just didn't work out. And there's, thousands of examples.
It was anguish, it was pain, I got the short end of the stick in that regard, no doubt about it. And also, a lot of companies just didn't want to talk to me because Agilent was one of them. Because I was associated, and thank God, Millennium Health, whom I work with now, regards me in a very positive light because I was an ethical doctor. They haven't penalized me at all for my association with Theranos.
I think she is a psychopath, and I think that's actually, I think that played both in her ascendancy and in her downfall. Because I think that this is a person that could have backed things up. I think if she had taken some responsibility early on, I don't think she'd be looking at 11 years. I think she could have done 2 years and been done with this and been a mother to her kids. But I don't think she's capable of choosing to do that, because I don't think she's capable of accepting responsibility for what she does. Not only patients, but also, you can see on the internet, she was suggesting her system as a diagnostic for children, and specifically autistic children. And that, to me, is just extraordinary thing to do. So no, I don't feel sorry for her. I just don't.
Judging by the range of symptoms we can find in the DSM-5, a psychiatry manual She is likely on the psychopathy spectrum. She is probably a psychopath. This means that she has a disruption in the part of her brain in charge of emotions. The primary and most basic emotion that keeps us alive is fear. People with psychopathic disorders don't experience fear and they don't recognize it. On the one hand, she doesn't feel sorry for anyone because she doesn't recognize that emotion. She doesn't understand what it is to feel sorry. This is an inborn change in the hypothalamus and amygdalae. On the other hand, she is fearless, and even when her situation was critical, she behaved in a calm and ambitious way. She definitely has something from the dark triad, which includes manipulativeness, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, which is an ability to reach one's goals no matter what. This comes from The Prince that Machiavelli wrote back in the 17th century. It's believing that the ends justifies the means, that you need to lie to get influence over others. I think that this dark triad is clearly seen in her personality, but to know for sure we'd need a clinical interview because otherwise it's just speculation.
Definitely a liar. Somebody who's not bothered by lying, doesn't prick her conscience, not much of a conscience in my opinion. Terrible pressures growing up to be successful. For the most part, although I do think in her weaker moments she knew she was doing wrong late at night, or I think. There's texts between her and Sonny that indicate that they knew this was a fraudulent.
Do you feel sorry for her?
You know, the weird part is, of course. I think she deserves what she got. But deep down, you do have to feel sorry. She's got 2 babies. Or she hasn't had one yet, but she has a baby and another coming. I mean, I would be devastated.
Do you feel sorry for Elizabeth Holmes?
No, not really. I have many students who want to change the world. And though not all of them will succeed, they really want to try. And they have worthy ideas. And I'd like them to see the real Silicon Valley success stories that everyone talks about. But at the moment, Elizabeth Holmes has overshadowed many of them. Not because it is happening in Silicon Valley, but because of all the buzz. And I totally understand this public uproar. We have discussed the importance of healthcare. And this was the reason Theranos was so famous in the beginning and then became so scandalous. Because people put their faith in them, while Holmes and others engaged in this fraud took advantage of people's hopes. So I don't feel sorry for her.